Norwich City had so much FA Cup fever, they want to do the whole thing all over again in a couple of weeks' time. Welcome back to this week's edition of the PinkUn.com Norwich City podcast, brought to you by Coleman's of Norwich. Paddy, where to start? It's not great, is it?
No, not great. No, I was dredging up the WordPress for words like soporific and insipid and limp, and so I'd add David Wagner's own word poor to try and assess what we saw at Carrow Road today. FA Cup third round, the magic of the cup is anywhere but Norfolk and Carrow Road today. So yeah, it's continuation of a theme, and if we thought that the New Year's Day game was one we'd have to endure, but this would be better. Unfortunately, this was in the same bracket for different reasons in terms of how the game played out. But the end result was more frustration, more of that directed squarely at the manager, and more questions and answers. And we continue to be in this holding pattern cycle until, without opening up the healthy debate we had on the show last week, until Ben Napper decides David Wagner is no more and has got a suitable replacement to replace him with. Otherwise, we're going to be in this footballing purgatory for a bit longer, I think.
Yeah, purgatory is a good way to describe it, and I think we'll dive straight in with that, Sam, because I wrote a piece this morning about yesterday about Ben Napper and needing time to move, and there's a lot of moving parts to obviously fix at Norwich City, and all of which we've spoken about on this podcast for what feels like certainly a long period, but maybe the last 12 months or so, maybe stretching even back to the back end of that Premier League campaign, where there's been so much discontent and ill feeling and frustration and underperformance at this football club for a long time. And it's obviously easy to discuss that after a 1-1 draw in the FA Cup, but I think it maybe feels like an apt point to do it, because I said this to Paddy on the way up. You can talk about the chants in many different ways, but for me, in many ways, the most damning aspect of it is that's a cup crowd, and by that I mean it's a different demographic. It's people bringing their kids to the first game. It's people watching who don't usually watch. People coming back to Carrow Road who haven't been at Carrow Road for a long period of time. That's not your sort of constant season ticket base of fans who've watched all of this season unfold. Blimey, all of the season. It's all flashed before my eyes there. That's damning. And for me now, it feels like this debate on David Wagner is increasingly becoming a little bit of a distraction for Norwich City and their season.
Yeah, I think when you talk about the different demographic that was inside Carrow Road today, and maybe how that affected things, it is alarming in the sense that it's clearly widespread, this dissatisfaction, as much as Stuart Webber wanted to highlight. Maybe Snake Pit divorcees, I think was the quote, and Delia Smith thought it was 20% of whingers. That's expanded the amount of people that have voiced their displeasure and discontent with the way that Norwich have played in the direction they're heading in. And I think maybe actually it showed how worn down those hardy season ticket holders are by now, because you had almost started to see apathy seep into that, and those angry chants were turning to just silence and poor atmosphere. Obviously, Russell Martin came to Carrow Road on Monday and said it was the quietest he'd ever heard it. So I think that apathy was starting to kick in, and maybe the new audience that was there, or the different audience that was there, actually highlighted what people with a bit more energy are feeling, and that there are people that want to voice their displeasure. But I think it's highlighted by sort of our response every time we're asked, when's he going to go? I don't know about you guys, I'm sure it's similar, but I get quite a lot of people asking me now about David Wagner. Do you think if they lose this game, he'll go? And after games, people will come up to us in the press areas and say, surely he's gone after that. And it's actually hard to say at any point, yeah, probably, or to suggest any sort of series of results that would end in that eventuality, because we've seen him win 1 game in 11 last season. We've seen him win 1 game in 10 this season, and it wasn't enough. We've seen poor results, poor performances, poor atmosphere, poor feeling, and it still hasn't been enough. And I know you wrote your column for this morning about giving Napa time, and I absolutely understand that argument, but he's now been here for over 2 months, and it feels like Wagner can absolutely do no wrong when basically everything at the football club is going wrong at the moment. And although this sounds like a hugely negative way to talk about a one-off result in an FA Cup game that will be replayed, I think what was especially worrying was the fact that all the issues we've seen in normal championship games were repeating themselves this afternoon. When you make 8 changes to the team, I think it was, when it's in a completely different competition, where maybe the mentality and the motivation for the players is a slightly different one, and still the same issues are rearing their head and the same result is produced, I think the man you're looking at for responsibility is quite clear. And I think a lot of Norwich fans feel now that David Wagner's been getting away with it for some time, but without this action from Ben Napper, as there wasn't even with Dean Smith last season, and going back and looking at the way that the club's operated for the last couple of years, without that sort of action, it's hard to say when it's going to end, and there hasn't been any communication about the direction going forward either. So it's hard to look at it, mainly because there's not much hope on the horizon, and I thought today was pretty symptomatic of that, to be honest.
Yeah, you've used that word that I was going to use, hope. This is what I think it comes back to, because we can sit here and have a really lengthy discussion for an hour about the future of Norwich City Football Club and probably life after David Wagner, and we could have that very real conversation, and people internally or whatever can talk about maybe these sunlit uplands that await them on the horizon. But in many ways, I just think where we are here in the here and now, fans don't want to talk about that. They want to see some shift in the short term, because it's not even like they're dropping points, but they're doing it with in a certain way or playing in a certain way. It's just it is hopelessness. I've been trying to capture it for a while, this kind of feeling that's existed around Carrow Road for a long period of time, and that's been there whether they've beaten Sheffield Wednesday 3-1, whether they've lost 3-2 to Leeds, whether they've lost 3-1 against Blackburn. It's been a real lack of hope, I think, around the football club and its future, and it now feels that is, and I don't want to go too drastic with this, but it almost feels like kind of that is being embodied maybe by David Wagner and by him, because that's where the frustration is going, and it kind of increasingly feels, from fans' perspective, ones that I speak to, and family members who are Norwich City fans, that people don't want to have the conversation about the future until they've had the conversation about David Wagner, Adam, and that's where this becomes very difficult for him. And we're talking a year after he's been appointed, and it's difficult, I think, for anybody now to look at David Wagner and see someone who's capable of leading Norwich City in long term, but probably even now the short term.
Yeah, I'd agree with that assessment. I think it's kind of one of them where I spoke to a few people this week as well, and nobody really is sort of got any positives particularly to take forward with David Wagner here. As you say, that the product on the pitch is poor. It's not exciting to watch. There's no sort of pleasure going to Carrow Road anymore. I mean, a few of my friends were saying today it's cost them £12, and they wish they just stayed at home and done something else, which is it's quite sad really that's what it's come to. And I think there's maybe a few people now starting to turn the attention to Ben Napper as well, because as Sam kind of alluded to, he's been here 2 months, and I think most people maybe thought when he came into the building that the first change he'd make would be the head coach. I think that was maybe a little bit unfair at the point, when he arrived, because he needed that time just to maybe get his feet under the table and assess things. But he's been here 2 months now, and nothing on the pitch has changed materially. There's no substance, there's no style, nothing that really aligns to what he stands for, or what he says he stands for in kind of the brief interview we got with the club channels on the day he arrived. And I really hope he's got a plan in place somewhere that maybe he's having to wait on. Maybe there's a man he's waiting to come in. And I know a friend of mine who supports Swansea, and he was kind of speaking about the appointment of Luke Williams yesterday. And I don't know, I almost felt a little bit kind of jealous of that appointment. He's a manager who's a great coach. his sort of style of football is excellent, and he's a coach that maybe, you know, is a little bit of a hoping that he's going to have to step up 2 divisions. But I think maybe that's what the Swansea fans are getting behind. You know, it's kind of that new manager bounce, which we got a little bit when David Wagner arrived. But I think the difference is Luke Williams kind of stands for a certain brand of football, and maybe David Wagner doesn't really have that anymore. It's kind of chopping and changing, trying to go into games. You never really know what kind of setup you're going to get. I mean, it was 5 at the back the other day. You know, maybe that was a fair way to do it in that game, given that, you know, the quality that Southampton had. But today, I mean, the players on the pitch there today, irrespective of the kind of the age demographic and the debates around that and the transfer window, that squad's capable of beating a mid-table League One team. And the fact they haven't is, irrespective of the poor performance on the pitch, it's not really acceptable.
Yeah, and that's it, Paddy, and that kind of stems, I think, to the heart of the conversation, because it's like, as I said there, it's all very well and good talking about the long term and changes and all of that maybe being on the horizon in the future, but it feels increasingly like David Wagner is kind of becoming a barrier, I think, for a lot of fans, and maybe because it's all very well and good talking about time, but you only get time if maybe there is some evidence that time should be granted, and therefore it feels increasingly like if Ben Napper wants to maintain this kind of quota of I want time, and you know, for all of the things that we've spoken about, as I said, for probably getting on for 2 years now, really, on this podcast, about recruitment strategies, about cultures, about communications, about all of those aspects, none of that will get fixed simply by pulling the plug on a head coach, and I think that's wider. That's a wider conversation about how to reconnect and plug all of those elements into a clear and consistent footballing strategy. But nobody wants to hear those conversations, and they don't want to hear about long terms when you've got a manager there who, for a year now, has underperformed really.
Well, what it would do at a stroke, and to take the point Adam made there about Swansea, it's a signal. It's a signal that there is change, and the way you've mapped it out, the way you wrote about it today, this is whether people want to hear it or not. Ben Napper has been appointed not for some instant quick fix gratification. This is a major turnaround job because of the state of that squad, that club. Championship mid-table nothingness last season. They're tracking on the same trajectory this time round. No sense of entitlement, but that's not where Norwich should be pitching the height of their ambitions. Irrespective of whatever model you've got in terms of the financial power you've got available to you, and it's been proven over the last 10 years or so. You know, Norwich, if it all comes together, are more than capable of getting themselves out of this division. For another day, the debate about staying in the Premier League, but in here and now, they're way below what the horizon should be for this football club, and all of that needs to be taken on board. I think it has been. I think fans understand that you bring Ben Napper in, and then you've got this sort of flux, maybe not quick enough for some, but you do have an evolving boardroom situation as well, which is playing out. We're in the midst of that now. All of that hints at new directions of travel, and something clearly at its heart data-driven, to try and put themselves back ahead of the curve as they were when Webber and Farker came together in that first 2-3 year spell. And Norwich were innovative and on a pedestal, and clubs were looking to emulate what Norwich were doing. Now Norwich are so far behind. You look at the template, look at the style of football. You said it today 2 or 3 times. You know, they're out-coached by a League One team today. That's pretty big indictment, really, of David Wagner and that group of players. And so, if nothing else, a change of head coach in here and now, or in short order, at least signals that it's almost the first public Ben Napper chip put on the table, and then that fans can see, okay, things are now moving definitively. As we sit here now, nothing. If you're a Norwich fan, what has changed? You know, Ben Napper has come in, Stuart Webber's gone. It's the same head coach, it's the same group of players, it's the same underperformance. Nothing has changed materially where it matters, in the shop window on that pitch. So, at a stroke, you remove David Wagner, then at least, you know, that is a clear signal, and then we wait what next, and whether internally the tension there in that is the what comes next isn't been fully formulated, the plan isn't ready to go, then all well and good. And again, I think you could accept that. You know, we're halfway through a season, it's a very difficult window. If you have identified a potential target, contractually there might be something that can be done in the summer that can't be done now. So that's all well and good, but I don't think the alternative, which is David Wagner in post between now and the end of the season, is going to wash either. Because it's quite clear that a year into the job, you chop up his 12 months in Norwich, but also more broadly his coaching career. And the word has always been bandied about. He is a streaky coach. His results come in clumps, good and bad. We're now in a bad cycle again. There'll probably be, if he stayed in post between now and May, there'll probably be another good cycle, but there'll be no doubt about it, based on the empirical evidence, another down cycle. And where does good and bad bring you? Brings you to mid-table mediocrity, as it did last season. So, if for nothing else, a degree of bloodletting and a signal to the fan base that, look, we've told you this is going to be mid to longer term, but here's the first signal that things are going to be different. I don't think David Wagner is as likeable a chappy as he is. If he was to lose his position now, could he turn around and justifiably argue that he merited longer in the job? That spell pre the one defeat in 8 before Christmas. And it was proven as the skittles fell around him in the Championship. Tony Mowbray, Michael Duff, one or two others, very fortunate to remain in post. So I think if we got to that level of regression again, then and the change is made, I don't think he could have any comeback, if I'm being honest. So I guess what this boils down to is, inside the corridors of power with the people who matter, would they be willing to go with a scenario that is an interim, more often you would expect an internal candidate to bridge to whatever comes next, if that isn't fully formed and ready to go at this stage, which it feels clearly that isn't the case.
Yeah, and that I think is the point to pick it up, because you can understand, as you said there, if they don't have the next bit sorted, if they don't have the next person sorted, and you don't want to just get someone in just to give a bounce to the squad, because we've seen now, I mean, Dean Smith, irrespective of how it ended, he did have a bit of a bounce, maybe a shorter bounce than what we expected, but he had a bit of a bounce and then failed to recapture that. David Wagner, in a very similar way, had a bounce, and since then, as you said, it's been real streakiness. So even if you don't have that next part formulated, and you don't want someone to come in and have that impact, it would make sense, something, and it kind of feels like this is where it's heading, for Norwich to have to put someone internally, and I guess Narcis Palash is probably the name that we would mention for that, to kind of look after that role in the meantime. Because Paddy says, I think it's much easier to then be able to frame a conversation about the long term once that element is kind of sorted, because at the moment all of the energy, win, lose, draw, from supporters, from us, we're spending a lot of time talking about it, is being put into David Wagner and his future. And those conversations about the long term can't happen, but also you don't get afforded the same amount of time. And that, I think, is kind of where the piece about Ben Napper that I wrote this morning is kind of coming from, because results ultimately will dictate David Wagner and fan sentiment and all of that stuff. But increasingly it kind of feels like, in order to buy themselves some time, in order to have those conversations, it feels like it needs to probably, the answer probably does lie beyond David Wagner. That fair? And in terms of interim, again, not ideal, but kind of feels like we're at that stage. Do you feel?
Yeah, I think we've been at that stage for a little while, to be honest. The main argument that I saw for Wagner remaining in post when he did, beyond a lot of people's expectations, I think it probably the pressure built to its greatest level. Going into that Cardiff game, the argument I saw for keeping him there was that he could act as that sort of Alan Irvine type character. If you're just going to fire your head coach and then get somebody in the meantime with championship experience who does a fairly steady job, isn't going to get you relegated, then, to be honest, although Wagner was the man receiving most of the criticism, he also sort of fit that bill, and I thought you could have done worse than to get somebody with his experience into that job, if that was the sort of path you wanted to take. But there are two arguments really that mean that doesn't work now, and one of them is that they need to show some signs of change, as we've spoken about, and I think Paddy nailed it when he said it's not about the instant gratification of promotion or a complete turnaround in the next month. It's about the fact that clubs who want to make a change, even over a longer period of time, are showing signs of doing that right here and now. And obviously, I think most people that the main sign they want to see is Norwich getting rid of Wagner. To be honest, if you ask most fans, and then the other argument would be that I don't think they can actually do much worse with somebody who's already at the club in a sort of interim position. I was thinking maybe, and although I wasn't necessarily Wagner in, if you have to put it in two camps, I now feel like there's not much Narcis Pelac could do that really, to be honest, would be much worse than the way that Norwich look at the moment. They have two good players to end up in relegation trouble, in my view, and it's not like he's just some random member of the backroom staff who doesn't have that much knowledge. He spent a lot of time with really top managers, and from your interview with him, it's quite clear that's. I mean, he's been a manager himself, so he has the experience of that role, and it's clear that it's something he'd probably like to do again in future. So with somebody like that in the background, even if you don't see that as your permanent solution, and maybe they won't want somebody associated with Wagner, if they do want to complete this turnaround and give the club a completely different feel, which I think would be understandable, there are alternatives in the building that would do a steady job. I think the thing keeping them from doing that at the moment maybe is the lack of acceptance there appears to be internally that the playoffs are an unrealistic goal. For me, it's you're almost dreaming to suggest that Norwich first will get into the playoffs, and two, if they got there, would somehow manage to get promoted. But still, in every programme we see that very public goal of reaching the top six. David Wagner, in his pre-match press conference, was making some pretty significant hints at preparing for playoff games later this season. And I think maybe that ambition and that view of where they can realistically get is stopping them from, or some figures behind the scenes at least, from accepting that maybe all they need is somebody stable enough to comfortably help them avoid relegation trouble. But then if that is your goal, and if you do want to push for the playoffs, this performance is nowhere near good enough from this current head coach either. So, to be honest, it's quite hard to replicate their thinking and to understand where they're coming from. But there are quite a lot of complex factors, and I think I would go along with you that even if it's an interim solution, that would probably appease fans and improve the situation a little bit for now.
Yeah, and you never know, it might even improve performances as well. And I'm not sure it would take that much at this moment in time. I mean, Adam, to talk about the game today, and Paddy referenced it, I said throughout the game, and I said to you guys as well, they were being outcoached, particularly in that first half where there were some attacking movements and rotations and in possession. I mean, the best chances they had in the first half really came on the counter-attack. They were lucky not to be 2-1 down at half-time. Good save from George Long, stroke, poor finish from Giovanni Brown. I think both things can be true. And obviously the post as well. But even in the second, you obviously have the Adam Eder chance from Hernandez's cross that he should convert. There was a snapshot as well that just went past the post from Liam Gibbs. But thereafter, there was no sign. But the last half an hour of any sort of creativity or attacking plan or rhythm or idea in possession of how they were going to break a team down that's a division lower than them. It's really concerning when you're at home in the FA Cup with that expectation. I understand to an extent there's always going to be an element of Norwich couldn't win today, because if you beat Bristol City and you beat them pretty comfortably, we're probably sat here and fans are out there going, yeah, well, that's what was expected. And then if you don't win, you kind of get this flip side of the coin. For me, it's almost park the result. Sorry, it's another performance that we have to file as not being good enough. Which Paddy referenced the run that they're on, 1 defeat in 8. I think it's 1 win in 6 now, and that kind of points to the streaky element. But even in that run, performances weren't great. I mean, I'm struggling to rack my brain the last time that I really think a Norwich team played well and well enough to win a game of football, and not just a burst in a game, or like they did at Cardiff when they had that burst that probably got them over the line. or the 20 minutes against Sheffield Wednesday, or the second half against Sheffield Wednesday and Huddersfield, which were enough to win those games. Pure 90 minutes, I think I'm probably going, unless you guys want to correct me, I feel like I'm going back to Huddersfield in August as the last time over a piece that I felt Norwich played really, really well. That's pretty damning, isn't it? And this is another performance against a team, a lower league team that kind of adds to that growing list of evidence.
Yeah, and then obviously factor in that the kind of the excuse of injuries is no longer there now either. They've got a lot of the players back that maybe were kind of, I suppose, mitigating factors for the drop in performance. Sargent's return is of course huge, and I think that going forwards it will help them. But materially, there's a common theme and a common denominator that the performances have been very poor. It's just been a little bit of individual quality against teams that are, on paper worse than Norwich, that's maybe got them over the line in kind of that good spell he had there just before Christmas. And I thought today, they're playing a mid-table League One side. It was an opportunity to get a victory, get sort of a few fans maybe that are different fans to usual, let them have a good positive performance and something to go home happy with. And it was very poor again, and sort of younger fans moving forwards, I have concerns, that they're having to come and watch a product on the pitch that maybe doesn't excite them. And for the future of the football club, of course, they need those younger fans moving forwards. And of course, the season ticket renewals are sort of getting closer and closer now as well. And you can't look at those performances on the pitch and say, you're willing to part with, in excess of £500 to watch that at the moment, particularly when there's no sort of plan. I think Wagner's approach is very, you kind of know when the substitutions are going to be made, what substitutions he's going to make, and none of them really ever seem to have a massive impact on the game. I know sort of at moments they have done, of course, at Bristol City, Adam Eder substitution gets them the win, and Cardiff, some of the substitutes combined to get goals, but it's all just very formulaic. It's all very, the theme, the common theme, every single game, underperformance, and just a little bit of individual quality at moments to get them the goals they need. But at the moment, I think Wagner sort of said it in his post-match that, it sort of boils down to the players on the pitch. They're the ones that are out there performing, but, it's the setup, it's the tactics that he's there. He's the one who coaches them on the training pitch, week in, week out, and I think they look like a team that's a bit lost and maybe not really coached, and they're almost sort of looking around at each other, confused at points, and that's a massive concern moving forwards.
You hit the nail on the head there, and it tallies with something that Chris Sutton has said a lot in columns that he's written recently, and it's worth saying if you haven't read his one after Southampton, that's definitely worth a read. But he speaks about it's been moments and not performances, and that's right, Paddy, isn't it? Really, we've looked at Norwich, and you mentioned it there. Adam Eder away at Bristol City, Adam Eder against Hull on the opening day of the season. We could go all the way back. It's John Rowe against Ipswich, 2 moments in that instance. This is at the moment a team that's functioning on moments and individual moments of quality rather than patterns of play and good kind of performances to get those results.
Well, I mean, you say at the moment, Connor, I've got to be honest, over the 12 months, I mean, you had to rack your brains to go back to Huddersfield, but that's pretty much the Wagner template, that it has been a moments style Norwich City we've seen on the pitch in the last 12 months. And that's where you see the gap or the chasm when they come up against, dare I say it, McKenna's Ipswich. They were far, as an identity, as a template, in and out of possession, the cohesiveness, the rotations. You touched on it again today with Bristol, but just the fluidity of movement, the understanding individually of their roles, and then within the collective, streets ahead of Norwich. And 2-2 that day. Well done, John Rowe. But roll it on. I mean, Leeds prior to Farker's Leeds, when they came here, a real clear identity. More recently, Russell Martin, Southampton, even Millwall, they looked far better coached and far more cohesive, and you could understand what they were trying to do. And I don't think that's too much to ask for from a coach who's been in post for 12 months, if I'm honest, with the quality of raw material he has got, which, we could all list 5 or 6 players, I think, in that Norwich squad who wouldn't look out of place in a team at the top end of the table for me. So it is. I don't think it washes to say that the raw material isn't there. Maybe not in the quantities it's been there in recent years, but there's more than enough to, in the right hands, meld something that is. And of course, results will fluctuate because that's the nature of the Championship. And look, refereeing decisions, they all come into play. Injuries, suspensions. But the common thread through any performance should be we understand what Norwich are going to do, what they're all about. And that was the mantra when Webber first walked through the door, that you would understand what a Norwich team were trying to do with and without the ball from the first team all the way down to the
Under eights. Yeah,
exactly. And I know time moves on, and a lot of bruises were taken and punches along the way, but why that was abandoned, I think is the root cause of a lot of the issues where we are now. Because once Farker departed, the philosophical coaching outlook was put in the bin, and we've had two pragmatic coaches, and with pragmatism comes, incremental gains at best, and probably at worst where they are now, which is just listing and just treading water. And the fear then is that at some point it will go the other way, and where that leads. Many clubs, Norwich among them, have discovered what that means in terms of slipping further down the Football League. So, and again, it flows back into the debate about signals, and maybe Wagner's departure is a signal, but another signal would be whether it was an interim or the coach of choice. Another signal would be that clear identity and philosophy. And I think, I don't want to speak on behalf of Norwich fans, but if I'm a Norwich fan going to see my team and I know what I'm going to get, and that I'm going to be entertained, and that there is going to be some actual methodology behind how they're trying to win games and how they're going to try and control games and have possession and be aggressive and pressing and all of those elements that the best coach teams in the Championship with Norwich have come up against recently clearly possess, I think you could row in behind it. But what has any Norwich fan got to cling on to watching the David Wagner team? Not a lot.
Yeah, and it's that hopelessness that I think we've tried to capture. And I think there was a period at the start of the season where there were a lot of hearing them less now, really, but at the start of the season where there were a lot of comparisons to Farker's first year, and that's true really in terms of levels. But when did Norwich finish 14th that year? 13th, 15th?
Below Ipswich.
So below Ipswich, very similar run of results. What the difference is what was set there in terms of foundations, in terms of this is a Norwich team that is trying to build this, played like this, recruit like this, and if you're a fan, then okay, the results fluctuate. As you said, it might not be a team that is particularly good or a team that's going to be challenging the top six, but you know what you're kind of watching and what you're getting behind there, and you know what they're building to. And this, again, just maybe bookends the whole debate on David Wagner and maybe his Norwich City tenure over the 12 months. There's very little about him, the way he plays, the way he's coached, the team selections that he's implemented, that leaves any room for what is for building, really. There's no signs of any sort of foundations being laid, and I think ultimately that is the issue that he's got with supporters, and probably why I suspect he won't be Norwich City head coach in the long term, as the debate that we've just had. Part 2, we'll discuss transfer windows, we'll discuss replays, we might even talk a little bit about the game as well, so we'll see you in just a second. Welcome back to the PinkUn.com Norwich City podcast, brought to you by Coleman's of Norwich. Usually we do our Bring the Heat segment. Not sure there was a lot of heat brought, but I think we'll give a collective winner to the people who just raised torches up in the second half, which I was waiting for, like Chris Martin and Coldplay, not that Chris Martin, another Chris, very good. I didn't even do that deliberately. It's almost like I write this stuff. I was waiting for the other Chris Martin and Coldplay to come on. It was a bit like, I don't know what that was all about or whether it was choreographed, but that was some, I don't know, literal light is heat. Well, light is heat, isn't it? So that's literal heat that they brought to it.
Is it
scientifically?
Always. I don't know. You're probably right, to be fair.
Yeah, I think I got a C in science, so I'm not the right person to ask.
Chris Martin did make one notable contribution. Wasn't there a bit where he was like yanking on the back of Demetrius Yanulis' mask? So maybe he did bring the heat.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good answer. Any others before we move on? I don't think you guys have got any moments. That was quite funny, actually. No, we'll leave it there in terms of bringing the heat. Just to continue, because obviously it's a year that David Wagner has been in post. That's an achievement, I think, for any head coach these days, with the rate at which they're sacked, and the rate at which they are changed by football clubs so consistently. And actually, I think you kind of put this point to him a couple of months ago, didn't you? And he said the average lifespan of a coach is about 13, 14 months, which is probably about right. But I want to kind of read some words that he used in terms of his style of play, because it's quite appropriate, I think, to the conversation that we've just had on him. And then I'll bring you in, Paddy. This was after he was appointed, and I think it would have been about a year ago. So this is what he said. Every manager has a different approach. I like this high-intensive, aggressive football where you are brave and chase opponents. Even if you have to respect opponents, which we all do, but look after yourself home and away, try to play your football. It needs work. It doesn't come by night. We have to do a lot on the training pitch and in a lot of video meetings too, and this is why I got hired. I said this is the football I love. This is the football I like my team to play, and I've seen enough that I'm sure we have the players, the individuals and the mentality to do it. That said, we need time. We have to work a lot. Confidence isn't at the highest when you're not winning football matches, as you're expected to do, but this is something we can only change on the grass. And I think that's something that was built with Wagner. High octane teams, aggressive teams, full throttle, heavy metal football. We know he's kind of a Kloppite in that regard, and very closely aligned to how the Liverpool manager sees his footballing philosophy. And I guess this is probably why, not that I necessarily want to go back over the Southampton stuff and the criticism, but this is partially why he's kind of found himself in the firing line a little bit, Paddy, because those words haven't really been what we've seen consistently. And to be fair, I remember, I think it was Dan O'Hagan, after he was appointed, I did a video speaking to sort of experts who had followed him along the way. I think there was one at Huddersfield, one at Schalke, and one at Young Boys. And I think Dan O'Hagan said this about his time at Schalke. I'd have to go back and check. I'm pretty sure it was Dan O'Hagan. But it was basically when there was a poor run in form, there was maybe this inability to continue, or maybe it was more of a sort of willingness to pull players back and to pull structures back and to pull kind of players into more defensive situations to try and solve those issues. But that's maybe the criticism that bears the most, as we kind of touched upon. It's that style of play element with David Wagner, isn't it? Particularly after maybe why Norwich dispensed with Dean Smith.
Well, it's pertinent that you mentioned that last championship game against Southampton and the 25% possession and 5 at the back, in his own words, 5-4-1. Contrast the away game at Southampton, which was this season, if anybody's in doubt, where 4-4, Barnes and Sargent, front foot, and a lot of the turnovers were high up the park, and the counters. That performance is those words. What we saw the other day is the complete polar opposite. So, okay, not every game in the interim has been 25% possession and 5-4-1, but I think the most of the games since have tipped more towards that than what we saw at Southampton that day. So, is it that he can't, to take your point about what Dan might have been saying about his time at Schalke, that when the wheels come off, he's not able to alter it, but more broadly, is that a sustainable style of football with this group of players? We know much has been made about the need to lower the age profile. So, physically, in terms of athletic output, because a lot of the tenets of that style of football rely on having players who can really go into the red zone and can sustain it for 90 minutes. The amount of games where Norwich look...
Sorry to jump in, but it's fine after like 4 games when you've assembled maybe 30, a squad of 30-somethings who, haven't played for football for a little while. But when you get to game 18, 19, is that kind of physical output and that ability to cross that red line still there? Probably not. Well,
I mean, we probably need to actually dig more into the actual data, which is readily available in terms of the physical numbers. The amount of kilometres covered, as they like to talk in those terms, and areas of the pitch where you've got those bursts, those intense bursts. All those metrics are out there, but just to the naked eye, it just feels that whoever the 11 are on the pitch cannot sustain that style of football. They're not able to deliver that from minute 1 to minute 90. The amount of times you watch them this season, and it's other teams who are finishing stronger. It's Norwich who are running out of gas, metaphorically. So, as much as we're dissecting the coach, is it that style of football that he wanted and maybe he implemented for a period at Huddersfield? But it's worth reiterating, once he got them out of the division and kept them in the Premier League by the fingernails, the season that came afterwards was every bit as lacking in intensity and urgency.
It was a Norwich Premier League season, wasn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, what I'm saying is there a shelf life in terms of his coaching methods, an impact on a team or a group of players, and certainly not something that will sustain you from 46 games in a championship season, because and again today with further evidence today, could those words marry up with that performance? No, is the answer. And I don't think it's enough to sort of, because they're pertinent, because they were back again today for the first time since that Southampton, since that Huddersfield game, Barnes and Sargent. I don't think it's enough just to hang it on Josh Sargent's prolonged absence from the team. Again, that if that is the case, then that unfortunately underlines the paucity of the recruitment and having the options available, because it's inevitable. You're going to get injuries, you're going to get suspensions, you're going to lose key players for periods of time. So, it would be naive to assume that you were only going to be able to roll out his template around, I don't know, a handful of key players, and if they're not there, then the wheels come off. It needed to be better than that. So, are we seeing that football that he pledged when he walked in the door? No, because if we were, we wouldn't have been mid-table last season and currently 13th or whatever it is, 14th right now. So, purely take the emotion out of it, where they are in terms of league positions 1.5 seasons into his tenure, well, maybe a full 12 months into his tenure, but in terms of when he took over this time last year to this point, no, he clearly hasn't. If that was his brief, he's not delivered.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting point you make about the physicality of it all, and I think that's a fair one to make. But also, if the players aren't, and we could talk about having a profile of player capable to do that, also fine. But then you have to reflect on again the way that they went in the summer with their recruitment and signing players who maybe physically were going to find it a little bit more challenging to deliver that style of play, and that ultimately, I'm afraid, is on him and the former sporting director who led that window. And he put in Christian Fashnak, for example. He would have pushed hard for a lot of the experienced guys that came in. So again, it's kind of marrying those two up. If you want to play that kind of attacking brand of proactive pressing, high octane football, you need to have a squad that reflects that. And at the moment, I think it's pretty clear that Norwich don't. Sam, in terms of Norwich and where they find themselves, I think it's apt. Obviously, I don't think we spoke about this much after Southampton, but the January window has opened, and we spoke earlier about kind of Ben Napper and having that opportunity publicly to make changes, which is very difficult to do 2 months into a job unless you make a managerial change or unless you're able to sign or sell players. And he hasn't had a training window up until now. What do you expect from this January window? Because Norwich have a big squad, as we said. It's a difficult squad in terms of the kind of age group that they've got there, and I think the average age of today's team was above 28 again, which is pretty high. It's going to be really difficult to shift that down at this stage. What do you kind of expect from this January window for Norwich City?
I would say I expect somewhere between what Norwich normally do in a January and what fans want. I think there probably is more intent and more desire internally to make a shift this January than there has been previously, when Norwich have been quite open about the fact that they don't like to do loads of business in January. Obviously last season, even when things weren't going amazingly and Wagner had just been just arrived at the club, they obviously only signed one player on loan. So traditionally it's not a club that's done much in January. Most clubs don't do as much in January as they do in the summer, but I think Napper is keener to do more this window than maybe the club have been previously, and I think he sees this as an opportunity to start his rebuild of the squad and to start that project that you spoke about of bringing the average age down and probably doing quite a lot of other things to it as well, to be honest. And although that will be difficult to do entirely in January, and in fact it's probably impossible to do all of that in January, hopefully they can make some significant steps to doing that. Obviously it looks like Mark Attanasio is likely to be a bit involved in that financially, but it's still a tight situation and not one where they have enough funds to really buy multiple players who are able to come in and be key players right now, especially when you look at the likes of the likes of Napper speaking about the importance of signing young players. You need, to be honest, to be bankrolled to the tune of 15 million plus to be able to sign probably even 3 or 4 young players who are capable of impacting things at a championship level, and that you can sign permanently. So I think in that sector it'll either be low numbers of players who can impact things now, or slightly higher numbers of players who might be projects for the future. But where things are headed under Napa from a recruitment perspective seems to be fairly clear. It looks like obviously there are going to be some players moving out on loan. Looks like Jaden Warner. Well, it looked like he was set for Notts County. Obviously, that managerial change that we spoke about in terms of Swansea earlier might impact things there. It sounds like Luke Williams was a big fan of Warner's, but probably some other players around the edges like Tony Springett. We've already seen Archie Mayer and Adeboyega from the under-21s go out on loan, so probably some work around the fringes. But it's like you say, it's going to be difficult for Napa to make much of an impact in terms of getting those older players out. There isn't going to be really anyone that wants to pay fees for the likes of Adam Forshaw, Danny Bart, Ashley Barnes, and there probably are some of those players that David Wagner will very much still want in the building. So I think until the summer, in terms of shifting those higher earners, those older players, that might be when Norwich fans have to wait until. But this is definitely an opportunity for Napa to make his mark, as you said, and I'm sure he'll want to hit the ground and make some signings before long, because we're already nearly a week now into January, and it's obviously not a long window. So hopefully they can start making some moves in terms of inward action pretty soon. But I'd suggest they might be looking to the future more than maybe the average club is in January.
Don't see them doing a lot. Pad, do you see much?
No, I don't, Connor. No, I think. I mean, there probably will be a bit of a twin track, but I still don't think the overall numbers are going to be very big. I just think
it's a big squad, isn't it, already?
And that's the messaging, that they need to prune, they need to thin. I think they would if you got them in a candid moment. That romp you did a piece earlier in the week of the outer contracts, if they could shift the majority of them, they would do, because everything you hear is that the financial imperative now is to reduce the wage bill. Basically, you can't, as we approach the end of the parachute payment cycle, whether you've got the Bank of America to locally label the Atanasio Group in the background or not as a backstop, you still need to have a real sober reflection on the new reality, which will be if they are still in the Championship, then even tighter belts will have to be the case. Clearly, look at the last set of accounts, that tens and tens of £1 million worth of debt, whether it's internal debt or weighted internally or not. That's not a good position for any football club or any business. So, no, I don't see a huge amount of business, if I'm honest. I think they're clearly in the market for a defensive midfielder, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's the lone route they go, because I just think, and part of this is obviously the whole debate we've had about the head coach. If that's as it clearly is, it feels anyway externally in a real state of flux, then is that the priority? And is anything that, and you can see it with those younger players Sam touches on who are going out. They're going out allied to Tompkinson already out, Brad Hills, Lewis Shipley as well, Abu Kamara at Portsmouth. They are very much going out now, or already out, to basically push their claims to be part of this in Norwich's squad from next season onwards, irrespective of who the head coach is. So again, that part of January is very much Napa looking to the future. And when I say future, I mean next season onwards. And I think really anything inward, if there is anything inward, would be with the same view. I don't, it was sort of muted to me, even if Atanasio wrote a rather large cheque in January, there's no guarantee Napa's going to cash it in, because he might think, again, Sam touched on it, January is not a market where there's the availability of player, or B, probably the financial sort of price tags make a lot of sense because everything's inflated because of the lack of player availability. So even if there is money to spend, I could easily see a scenario where Napa sits on that until the summer, where there'll be more players, there'll be better value. He's had another few months to put the data processes in place to maybe scour leagues around Europe where you get more bang for your buck, basically. So, no, I don't see anything of the major category in terms of their transfer business in January. For all those reasons, I think it'll be more outs than ins, and the ins that are in will come in if they do. Are not going to do huge difference to this group of players. I think it's going to be all about now, and that's a difficult message because you don't really want to message out, look, we're writing off January, we're writing off this season, but implicit in putting plans in place for the mid to longer term is that anything you do in this window is with a view. I mean, I think Napper himself said it. I can't quite remember the forum he said it in, but he's not for the quick fix. He, in any area of what he sees the sporting director template as, and clearly recruitment is a massive part of that. He doesn't see the value in something for the sake of the next few months. Anything he will do, and that spans recruitment and it spans this window, will be with the mid to longer term in mind, because he is now trying to essentially overhaul, put a new culture in place, new processes, and recruitment is going to. I don't see why he would hive off recruitment and treat that any differently to building up the recruitment department, building up the scouting, building up the academy, sports science, having a look at that, the whole incorporation of data in every facet of the business. Why would you treat recruitment any differently? So I think it'll be a very quiet window, if I'm honest.
Is a good window for Norwich City, Adam, keeping John Rowe and Gabby Sarah, but beyond the end of it, obviously we've kind of had it played out with John Rowe, and David Wagner said pretty publicly that they feel they're in control of that situation. He's obviously got, 18 months, he's 25, isn't he, but they've got an option on that. Gabby Sarah as well, someone who's produced a lot of quality over the first half of this championship campaign. I mean, to lose them would be pretty disastrous, I think, with the position they're in. It kind of feels like maybe that's the aim, to at least get those guys to the summer when you can assess it again.
Yeah, I think with fan mood at the moment, if you sold either of those, it would almost be a tipping point for fan frustration to grow even larger than what it already is. And I think there'd be an expectation if you were to sell one of those, that you would then go and do 3 or 4 bits of business with the money that you've I suppose brought in from the sale. So being that they probably wouldn't, or don't know at the moment, kind of the outlook of the club moving forwards, because we don't have any stability really with a head coach or a set plan, I think you almost better to keep hold of those two, let them be here for the rest of the season. I think that their value is not going to drop really between now and the summer. If anything, they've got potential to probably grow it. So I think you've got to keep hold of them, and then you've got the signal then in the summer. If you do have to sell them, you've then got a little bit of cash to maybe go and inject in certain positions that may be a requirement, because they would have had a lot of players out of contract that would have left at that point, and maybe a few others that would have departed. So I think, the worst thing they could do at this current moment in time is to sell those two, because I think with the mood and the feeling around the football club at the moment, it wouldn't send a very good signal.
Yeah, and I think, as you said, Paddy, it will be about opportunities and maybe something popping up a little bit later on that maybe they feel is possible to do. Next couple of weeks is good fun. Friday night in Hull, probably a Tuesday night in Bristol. Paddy, I mean, forget Venice, forget all of those luxurious locations around the world that you could be in. I mean, that's proper championship, innit? That's proper meat and potato pie stuff, that.
That's probably what we'll get served up, Connor.
Yes, yeah.
In a non-self-entitled way. Well, how dare you serve us that food? But not been to the Memorial Ground, so if nothing else, I can say I've been to it. A bit like Plymouth earlier in the season. I quite enjoyed it.
Went well.
Well, not on the pitch, no, but it was a very nice stadium, home park, and but it's a desperate state of affairs that we now have to schlep to Bristol. How dare they force us to do it? But we'll deal with it, and probably to see a defeat, as you hypothesised there, Connor, as well, to throw into the bargain. But Hull's not too far, really, is it? In the grand scheme of where we travel from.
It's the Friday night element, isn't it?
What did you have plans on Friday night?
Well, not especially, but it's just then it makes it an overnight one, and it becomes sort of a different away day, doesn't it?
You need your binoculars for Hull, because we're right at the back.
Honestly, I'm bad with heights. Hull's the worst one, but it's not necessarily the height of it, but it's like it's vertical. And by the end, you get sort of, so you climb up the stairs, and by the time you're at the top, you're kind of crawling. That's how vertical it is, and not a massive fan of that. Sam, Hull.
Yeah, if you want to work on your calves, Hull is a place to be. I just think
It's not. I know it is what it to use a football adage, it is what it is. But a replay in between games against Hull and West Brom at this stage of the season. I mean, we've spoken before about the critical stage of the campaign that it is for Norwich, and you know that if Leeds progress tomorrow or Norwich get through in the next round, then that game against Leeds is likely going to be pushed into a midweek as well. A replay's not helpful for Norwich, is it?
Not really, although David Wagner said that he'd take it in the pre-match press conference, so he can't really complain. I have less sympathy given they'll probably be going on a plane. But no, you are right in all seriousness that with the injury issues they had at the start of the season and the extent to which Wagner and even Delia Smith felt it had a significant impact on their results, they will probably be fearing that a little bit. But equally, I wouldn't expect him to do anything especially different to what he did today. I think it will be very much a second string 11, if not even weaker than it was today. You have to bear in mind it feels like that he must have gone even worse because they drew with a League One team, but Ashley Barnes was in there, Josh Sargent was in there, Borja Sainz, Grant Hanley. So there were plenty of players who were in there purely to sort of get minutes and build their fitness again, and are actually pretty likely to start against Hull. So yeah, it might be an even more weakened team that we see at the Mem than what we saw today. So probably the results of the chances of getting a result, will go down a little bit. But yeah, I think Wagner will very, very much have that factor of the stress on his players fitness wise, and he'll be taking that into consideration, and I'm sure he'll do everything in his power to ensure that doesn't have too much of an impact on the season and on the next few weeks.
It's a big couple of weeks for Norwich City, Adam. We've kind of spoken about the playoff situation that does exist. How alive you think it is probably depends on maybe how you view Norwich City at this moment in time. But Hull, Friday night, TV, of course, as well. It feels like probably one of those games, again, where we're talking about it being a big game for David Wagner.
Yeah, I mean, given where Hull are in the league, it's one of them games where you could close the gap to a couple of points, or it grows to 8 points. And I think it's almost that flux then of kind of, if they win, are the playoffs back on, and if they lose, it's all over again. It's kind of just that cycle we've been in all season, which is, it's not a great place to be. Yeah, I think it's crucial. These next, we spoke about it really, the games kind of we've just had, how important they were, and the fact they only took 1 point from those 3 games was a huge blow, but somehow or other they're still, given how poor the Championship is this season, they're somehow still in and amongst it, and there's a possibility they could still make it. So while it's still alive, you kind of, it's the hope that kills. But yeah, with the way the performances are, we've already spoken about, at length on this podcast, I don't see it, and yeah, I think it's going to be another difficult evening at I think it's the MKM Stadium now on Friday. So just looking forward to the food element of it, to be honest. I've seen pretty good reviews of Hull online. Media Scran, our neighbours across the pond like to focus in on that, and I've seen some pretty good reviews, to be fair, about Hull. I saw a toffee apple crumble at full time to the press. Not that we're sort of privileged in that sense. We still have to travel to Bristol on a Tuesday night, so you still have to feel sorry for us. But yeah, in terms of that food element, yeah, that's probably the one upside, I suppose, of having to go to Hull.
Now, I've heard a vicious rumour about Hull. So they're sponsored by McVitie's, aren't they? As in the biscuits. I have seen pictures of them giving out entire packets of biscuits to, and for its work, I think they should be doing it to away fans as well. So I'll chuck that in there. But that would be nice. At least I could gorge on them if things are going badly at the what is it? KMK? Yeah, exactly. So we shall see. That probably is an apt place to end the podcast. Thank you very much for watching / listening. If you listen, of course, you can watch the show in full and see all 4 of our glorious faces in whatever definition you like on YouTube. And if you watch and don't want to see that, then you can listen as well, and leave us a review, like, comment, all of that good stuff as well. And we will see you after that Friday night trip to Hull next weekend. In the meantime, enjoy the prospect of a cup replay in Bristol next midweek to come. See you soon.